Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fingal's Cave podcast. For this show, we welcome back Lee Harris, who was one of our first and also one of our finest guests we had so far. As many of you know, Lee Harris has worked closely with Ian Dury and the Blockheads and formed the band Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets in 2018, which has since successfully toured the world for almost 7 years. Hi Lee, it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me back. Nice to be back.
Also with us is Phil Salathé. Hi Phil, great to have you by my side.
Always a pleasure.
So you were our first guest in the second episode we had, and now 25 episodes later, you're back again, Lee, and I'm really happy and really glad that you're here. So we discussed and had different ideas what to talk about, and we finally came up to the main topic that we would love to talk about, the development of the Pink Floyd music and composing and everything between 1967 and 1972. And I think it's extremely interesting to talk with you about that, because this is the area you covered with the sources. So I'm really looking forward to delve into that area of the first 5 years of Pink Floyd. But before we do that, I would like to talk with you a little bit about you, because there are some interesting things we missed the first time we met. We talked in between a little bit about your father also, who did a very interesting podcast a year back, I would say. And your father is a cameraman, a technical assistant, and also a director. So he directed several advertisements, music videos, and even short films.
He was primarily a cinematographer, a lighting cameraman, and he would have been a technical assistant before that, yeah. And then he didn't direct that much stuff because he was too busy doing cinematography. But yes, famously he did High Hopes with Storm, and then he did. Do you remember the remastered adverts with the bald heads with tattoos on their heads? They might not have had them in your okay. So he did that, and then he also did the Pulse advert, which I also worked on. I had to. There was a red light, obviously the pulse, pulsing across the bedroom in time with the heartbeat from Dark Side, and I was the person who was turning the light on and off in time with the heartbeat. But I had there was no playback, so I just had to do it from what I thought it was. And luckily it matched up.
So having a father being in that artistic environment, normally if you start being a musician or whatever, the parents start, no, do something where you can make money with. Was it different on your side, having a father who was in the music business and the film business, so that you knew that you want to be an artist yourself?
I think what it really came down to was my mother was my father's agent. And so I think my dad being in that business, they weren't going to be annoyed if we wanted to do that sort of thing. And they just wanted us to be happy with whatever we chose. So they never forced on us, get an ology, or, it was never like that. It was always, the first thing I think I remember wanting to be was a film director, and then a writer actually, and then the musician thing just came when I was 13, I think, and I think I wanted to get. I had a Super 8 camera, film camera, I should say, and I used to make little films with that, but with friends we'd make horror films, 3-minute horror films and things. And then I wanted to get a video camera, and then we went to see Dire Straits at Hammersmith Odeon, and I went to a lot of concerts when I was a kid, but this one in particular, Eric Clapton came out as a special guest, so it was he was unannounced, no one knew he was going to be there, and the whole place just went mad when he played Further On Up the Road. And it was because it was, it wasn't a Dire Straits song. They were backing him up, and something about that. I went from we were sitting at the back of the stalls, and I got up and just walked to the front like I was. It was like being it was like, sounds corny, but it was like a pastor or something. I was like my God, I had to go up. I mean, by this point, I'd already seen Pink Floyd doing The Wall at Earl's Court, but I was only 7, So when I was 13, and and Clapton was doing that, that was it. I mean, I had to get a guitar, and that was the turning point. And this was at a point when you have to take an exam to get into your next school, and because I passed that exam, my parents were going. If I passed, they were going to get me a camera, a video camera. But I said I'd really like a guitar, and they got me a guitar instead, and that was it. And then that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I've ended up doing, obviously. So yeah, I mean, they were never. They just wanted me to be happy, and my sister as well, who works in the business as well. She's in the film business. She's an agent for photographers and stylists, and she does that side of things rather than in the camera department. She does that sort of thing.
There's something poetic in that somehow. I can understand intuitively somehow The Wall is not a show that makes people think, oh, I could do that. Like that could be me up there. Whereas Mark Knopfler and Eric Clapton, you can look at that and think that could be me. Like I could get up there and do that.
Yeah. The Wall just made you want to go and see more concerts.
So in another interview on Grimoire.com, you mentioned your meeting with Norman Watt-Roy from Ian Dury and the Blockheads in the late 90s.
Well, yeah, I mean, my favourite... This is the weird thing is that when I got a tape machine, a tape recorder, it would have been about 1982, my parents got me 2 cassettes to go with it. One was Dark Side the Moon, and the other, actually they got me 3. One was Dark Side the Moon, one was Relics, and the other one was Ian Dury, the Blockheads' Greatest Hits. And that's who I ended up working with.
What a range.
It's really weird. Yeah, it's really weird. But Norman, how did I meet Norman? Oh, yeah, so it was actually through a friend of mine, Billy Freedom, who's an amazing drummer and producer. And he one day just said, have you ever heard of a guy called Norman Watt-Roy? And I said, you're joking. He's like my bass hero, And he said, do you want to come and have a jam with him? And he'd hooked up with him through someone else we knew. And they were going to jam, but they needed a guitar player. So I said, absolutely. And at that point, I'd kind of given up ever sort of really sort of making it in music. I was now, I must have been 27 or so. So I was past the point of when when you're younger and girls go, oh, you're in a band. I was at that point where they're like, oh, you're in a band, and so I'd kind of given up, and I worked at Ticketmaster, and I was actually in charge of the box office computer systems, and I phoned in sick so I could go and play with Norman and Billy, and we hit it off really quickly, and I think it must have been about 3 weeks or something like that before Ian Dury died. And so when he died, I was still in contact with Norman, and we were talking about putting a little band together with Billy, and that never happened. And then one day Norman just said, oh, we're going to carry on, but we're just going to shout the backing vocals. We're not going to sing the songs. I was like, okay, that sounds weird. And months went by, and then eventually the following year they started gigging. And at that point they had a website, and it was quite antiquated. And I just thought, well, why don't I offer to take over the website, and I can go to gigs and take pictures, and maybe I can sell tickets for them, because they were getting little gigs in pubs and things, So I started doing that, and before long I was telling them what songs, I was writing the set lists for them, because I suppose Ian used to do that, but he obviously couldn't do it now. So none of them really wanted to do it. So I started doing it, and then I started getting them gigs, and then they realised that, I could play. So then that meant that Johnny, the guitar player, who was also playing with Bob Geldof and World Party, could then go off and do gigs with other bands he was playing, so I could take his place. Or it meant that Chaz Jankel, who wrote most of the songs with Ian Dury, if he couldn't make a gig, I could take his place because he also played guitar. And then the keyboard player, Mickey Gallagher, who used to play with The Clash, and at this point was playing with the drummer from The Animals, and because he actually took Alan Price's place in The Animals in the 60s when he first left. So they had a band called The Animals and Friends. So then if he couldn't make a gig, Chaz would play all the keyboards and I'd play Chaz's guitar parts in front of Chaz, which doesn't happen that often in bands, I don't think. And that went on for 12 years. And, you know, they were, well, they still are, you know, my favourite British band, you know, like they were like kind of like the UK's E Street Band, I think. You know, there was such a great live band, you know. So yeah, that was 12 years, and then I think the rest of the story we've heard before, where I moved to France, where I am now, and then, you know.
I even read that Guy once played for Norman then.
Yeah, when Norman couldn't make a couple of gigs because he used to play with Wilco Johnson, I just roped Guy in. So he did about 4 shows with the Blockheads over 2 years or so. Not that many.
So you were friends at that time already?
Yeah, that's why I asked him, because we were friends. I think, I mean, actually, the reason that I met Guy was actually nothing to do with my father or Storm or anything. It was because, well, it was because of Storm, but it wasn't because of my father's relationship with Storm. It was because Storm had done the album cover for an Ian Dury and the Blockheads album called Mr. Love Pants. And consequently, when he had an exhibition at Abbey Road, the Blockheads were invited. And so I went, and I hadn't seen Storm for a long time. And I took my parents along. So they saw Storm, and they probably hadn't seen him in, you know, something like 12 years or something. I think it was about 2007, 2008, something like that. And that's where I met Guy. And once we knew each other, we became fast friends, I'd say.
If somebody wanted to hear your contributions to the Blockheads during those years, where should they look?
They can't really, because they're just, it was all live shows. I never recorded anything. I never recorded anything with them in a studio. There are probably bits and pieces, but you know, this was at a time before iPhones had really good cameras on them, and microphones. So there's stuff out there. There's actually a video on YouTube of us playing with me and Guy, actually, with them at a big show that's what's that band? Fairport Convention.
Oh, sure.
They have a festival. They're a festival every year, and there's, I think Sky TV filmed it. So there's a thing of us playing on that. But yeah, there's not really anything out there with me with them. Yeah, that boat sailed.
So we briefly talked about the birth of the Saucer, so to speak, in 2015, when you went to a show from David Gilmour at the Orange in France. When you had that idea, have you been sure from the very beginning that you only wanted to play the very early songs from Pink Floyd, or is that something you discussed with Guy later, or did the research before?
The idea came because I was watching David playing all the newer stuff, and so I was just thinking, in order to get Guy to say yes, I'm not going to say let's go out and play Comfortably Numb. Exactly. You know, that was really, I mean, it was the birth of the band. Really was a selfish thing. It was me wanting to go out and play again, because I hadn't played for a few years. But no, I never thought of doing. Once I had that idea, I thought it's a good idea to stick to that. And then there was a guy called Tom Wilcox who started a band called Holy Holy, that is the band that with Tony Visconti and Woody Woodmansey, and they play the early Bowie stuff, or at least the album that they both play on as the rhythm section. I can't remember what. Is it the man? Maybe it's The Man Who Sold the World. And Tom, I went to Tom with the idea, and he said to me, you should actually only play the Syd Barrett era. So then I went to it and I thought, well, we can't, because it's like really not very long. It's not a concert, you know. But that gave me the confidence that someone else in the business thought it was a good idea before I went to Guy with it, you know. It's quite funny though, you know, because I think our band's early PR maybe got it a little wrong, because there was a lot of emphasis on us playing, especially the Syd Barrett years. and we've only ever played about 20 minutes of Syd Barrett songs. Mm-hmm. And in one way, it's great because it's showing that a member of Pink Floyd, other than David, is, you know, playing Syd Barrett songs. But on the other hand, it doesn't help getting all the people who think they don't like Syd Barrett music to come and see us. You know, it's. I think when I look back, it's a bit of a shame that there was so much emphasis. It should have just been, yeah, they're playing early Pink Floyd, and maybe left out the bit about the Syd stuff, because I think a lot of people, especially in America, actually are frightened away by that. You know, because they think they don't like it, and of course when you come and hear it, and it's in a concert hall and it's loud, you know, it sounds great. That stuff. They're great songs.
The one thought I had a moment ago was just listening to the band live in Buffalo. One thing that really struck me is if there was one album that I walked away thinking that it sort of, I don't want to say defined the show, but that really stuck out to me as being a prominent part of the show, it was Obscured by Clouds, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that material really, partly, of course, because it was my first time ever hearing some of those songs live. That era really was kind of a revelation to me, hearing how that came across live and hearing how much of the repertoire actually came from that album, more than I would have, I think, guessed.
Yeah, this always happens when I'm doing an interview. I go completely blank, and there'll be a forum now set up by someone saying he doesn't know anything about Pink Floyd. But I've now forgotten what else is on Obscured by Cloud. So Obscured, what that we play. So right, we play Obscured when you're in.
Burning Bridges was on the.
Yeah.
And I think was Childhood's End on that one.
Yes.
Or
it was. Yeah, it was. That's right. So I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, I suppose
it's close to half the album.
But we are jumping.
We are jumping out of
it. This is the perfect segue.
Yeah.
Going back to 1967 and 1968, the Saucerful of Secrets and the first album, The Piper and Gaze of Dawn, are the main Syd Barrett albums, I would say. So these are for sure very different. And as you mentioned before, Lee, it's funny that Pink Floyd fans are Syd Barrett Pink Floyd fans or Pink Floyd fans and don't really like Syd Barrett. And I personally, I was not too much into the Syd Barrett era, I have to admit. I was more like Atom and Mother and the forthcoming albums. But listening to Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets, your band, I mean, I saw you live like 6 times or anything, and now I start listening a few years back to the old Syd songs, and and I'm very happy that I saw your shows, because through these interpretations and renditions you did, I learned a lot about the Syd Barrett songs.
We should give credit too. The band plays repertoire from before The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, right? In as much as there's been Remember Me and then the singles.
Oh yeah, Remember Me.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that was cool. Yeah. A lot of people got very excited about that.
Yeah, it's good fun doing that. I got to say, I was actually like you, Neil. So, I mean, of course, I knew the Syd Barrett songs, but I was, which is why I was saying before about people who think they don't like it, because I thought I didn't like it. And then once Nick said, "Oh, this is a good idea," I was like, "Oh shit! Now I've got to go back and listen to this stuff," you know. and that's when I realised actually there are jewels in there. There's some really great stuff. It's not just astronomy, but and you know, and especially the way that music was produced then as well. I mean, you know, and I remember saying to Nick at one point, you know, I was talking to him about Syd's use of the Binson, of the Echo machine, and saying, you know, did he used to experiment a lot with it? And he said, no, we didn't. You couldn't experiment with it, because if he started doing that, then Joe Boyd or someone would say, stop, we've got to get on and record the song, you know. So to think that he got sounds out of it without even spending lots of time with it is incredible, you know.
He's such a fascinating songwriter. One of the things that hit me quite suddenly, I've done academic conferences about Pink Floyd. I'm working on a book. And just as I thought about things, it hit me quite suddenly. More than any songwriter I know, Syd Barrett will start a song in one key and finish it in a different key. And I'm not talking about your standard kind of truck driver's modulation where you go up a half a step. I mean, songs like Astronomy Domine, you start it in E, you finish it in D. Or Matilda Mother, Lucifer Sam, so many of them, the final chord has just nothing in common with where you started. So that seems to be a kind of tick of his, that he does a lot, and it really makes a lot of his endings sound very open, I think.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I'm not, you know, educated musically, you know, enough. I just sort of know what sounds right or whatever. But but I'm not technical. Oh yeah, and also, what's the tune? Power Talk H.
Mm-hmm.
I love that track. You know, that's. I mean, I'd love us to try that, but hasn't happened so far. Probably won't now. But I think that Sid, after the Floyd, where you've got the recordings where it's just him and a guitar, I think they're quite difficult for people to get into, I think. What do you think?
I mean, Opal was my first Syd Barrett album, and it might have even been my first album from that era. So I jumped right in at the deep end with,
yeah.
But I was also listening to a fair bit of punk rock at the time, bands like
Right.
Dead Milkmen and Dead Kennedys. So for me, it didn't seem that jarring. The places where it's a little bit wobbly didn't matter to me at the time. And so my young brain kind of absorbed it and said, well, this is just the way. If there's a funny note here and there in a song like Opal, I was able, maybe more so than I might have been earlier or later, to hear the vitality of the music.
I wonder if there's a thing where, the later years of Pink Floyd, as in Dark Side onwards, a lot of people who like more mainstream music, and so they find it difficult to listen to that, the Syd Barrett stuff, especially like when his solo stuff. And the people who like the early years are more likely to get into that stuff, I think. Although I like all of them, but yeah.
A long time ago, an ex-girlfriend of mine, I think she didn't really know Syd Barrett's music, so I was playing it for her and said, I've noticed that a lot of women I know like his music. I won't try to speak to why. And so she listened for about 25 minutes to about half the album. And she said, are you kidding me? He sings about us. He sings about women and love. What's not to like? So there's that angle too, is that the topic, I mean, Rick, when he wrote songs about women, it tended to be sort of wistful and somebody slipping through his fingers. Roger, we all know the complexities there. David doesn't really seem to write about women as such very much. And when he writes about intimate things, it seems to be more about, a different and more kind of mature vantage point. But Syd, you get the impression of, you hear all these stories from his friends and confidants and his sister that, women found him extremely magnetic. And I think you can hear that in his music. I think that's in the mix too.
I do like David's song on the Rat That Lock album about his mother, though. That's if you don't know it's about his mother, it could be about just a female. Do you know what I mean? Right. But that's such a great song, and he wrote the lyrics as well on that. I mean, it's it's a great. That's really good. Well, I digress there, but
another thing that I really notice, and I notice this as a bass player because that is one of my instruments. I'm a trumpet player and a bass player. When you listen to those early records with Roger and his bass parts, they're very intricate, right? There's lots of counterpoint going on. Where he's playing all these complicated melodies in songs like Matilda Mother. And it's very, very notey, or the Scarecrow or the Gnome. Just the Gnome, actually, not Scarecrow so much. And I was thinking about why that changed, and Pink Floyd. The members of Pink Floyd love to call themselves lazy. I mean, I know that David Gilmour has called themselves that before. I don't really believe it, I mean, in the sense that you can't accomplish what they do and have been lazy. But there's a narrative that comes up and people say, Roger's bass parts got simpler because he wasn't willing to work at it. But I was thinking, actually, I think there's a very different reason. It's hard to sing and play those parts at the same time. Like, in other words, if your fingers are moving up and down wildly, he wasn't the lead vocalist in 1967. So he had a lot of room to write these, massive.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah.
Wandering over the fretboard. What's it been like to rehearse some of those parts? Has it been the kind of thing, I mean, I don't know what your rehearsals have been like, but is it the kind of thing where everybody sort of already knows their parts cold and everything just kind of locks together nicely? Or has there been some trickiness in putting together?
I mean, there was one rehearsal earlier on where we listened to see Emily play from I've forgotten. It's a live version that you can hardly hear the vocals on. Is it Sweden or somewhere?
Stockholm 1967. It's a famous tape that was under wraps for decades and decades, and then the band put it out.
Yeah, so we had that on, and we were listening intently to it, and we're trying to work out, like we all had our instruments. Nick was sitting at the drums. We were all I'm trying to work out, this, and suddenly Nick says, stop playing in a sec. So whoever it was probably me, I think, stopped it on the iPad. And he said, I've got an idea. Why don't we pretend we're in a band and just play together?
That's such a great line.
So from then on, we kind of stopped doing that. I think the next time, we stopped listening intently to parts and just playing. And so from then on, what I did was I've said this before. I treated all of the original recordings as if they were demos, and so I'd take the part that I liked on it, and I'd stick with that. Or if it was a thing where Gary and I were both, if he wasn't singing, we were both playing, we'd work out, oh, you can do this and you can do that, or I'll play this inversion. An inversion, for anyone who isn't a musician, is like there are several areas on the guitar where you can play a chord. So Gary might play it up down here and I'll play it up here, so it sounds slightly different. Yeah, I would just treat them like they were demos. So, and then there are obviously there are songs where, like, for instance, Astronomy, the very first, so I play the first guitar solo in it, which is the da 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 da, the E to the E flat. I mean, you have to do that. You can't not play that. That's part of the song. It's a melody in as much as it's a solo. But then if you take the funky dung section of Atom Heart Mother, I never play that the same way. I always play that differently every show.
You told me that funny story that one fan complained that one of these days would be played wrong, and this is the only song you played note by note, but they only knew the 87 or 94 version.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there's always someone on the internet saying you're doing something wrong, or more than one person. Yeah, no, that was funny. It was the one part that I was mostly because I'd never played slide before this band, so I had to learn how to. And of course, the first thing I did was I learned how to do it normally, with a bottleneck on here. But then when I bought the lap steel that I use in the roundhouse with the knife, my only time playing that would be at rehearsal or at the gig. So it was easier for me to learn the part as it was on the album before I then branched off, deciding like I'll add this bit and I'll add that bit. But I played it like the record for the first, for 2018 and 2019, and then I changed it after that. Yeah, but that's primarily what I did, and I think, I mean, everyone in the band, I can't really speak for everyone in the band because everyone would have done something different. I think I would get quite forensic in that. I know, being such a big fan of the band, I know that there are some sounds that I'd like to replicate. So, like, maybe not even if I'm going to play. I mean, I've got much shorter fingers than David's got. I don't play like David Gilmour, but I do play slowly. I don't play fast. You go and see some. Well, I suppose any guitar players who've played with Roger, for instance, they might be more inclined in their own style to not play anything like David and be more not melodic, because David is melodic, but he's melodic in a bluesy way, I suppose. But what I have got going for me is that I don't play fast, so I could at least play something that maybe someone can remember when they listen back to it at the Roundhouse. They can remember that. They might remember that solo if they've heard it 10 or 15 times. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's like a really, you might not remember it all, But I'm trying to, what I'm trying to explain is, without getting technical, is I try and replicate a specific sound that he would use, which might just be, if you're a guitar player, using the neck pickup and not lots of distortion, just things like in our version of Echoes. So it sounds like his sound, but it isn't necessarily obviously the same notes that I'm playing, but it has that David Gilmour sort of tone, if you like. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the trickiest things for any band to deal with, isn't it? I mean, in other words, when you're talking about material that originates in the 60s and 70s, you can make yourself a little crazy trying to get it to sound exactly the same, because no one wants to be the person who in 1986 was playing the DX7 electric piano. No one wants to look back and sort of feel like, it was so much more soulful and kind of the tone had so much weight. But I remember reading an interview with you a while back where you talked about like some of the thinking you've had to do about, okay, like how how much do I want to try to recreate that sound, and how much do I want to find implementations that I know won't break down on stage, right? I remember reading something about some Italian heat waves that put paid to some of your gear. Am I remembering correctly?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, it was in Switzerland, all that was one of my fuzz pedals just stopped working because of the temperature. It was a we can get really nerdy here, but it was a germanium fuzz face, germanium
it's
fuzz.
It's the nerdy podcast.
Yeah.
Exactly. We think of nerdy here. Where can we get nerdy, right?
Fingal's nerdy cave.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was a fuzz that just didn't like the heat and went. And then once that happened, I was like, right, well, I need to use a silicon fuzz where that doesn't happen. And then I didn't really like that. And once I got out of that, then I was like, well, then I'll use a tube driver, which is what David uses now and has been for like 30 years. And then you sort of realize why David stopped using that gear and why he started using this gear. I mean, essentially, for anyone who doesn't play guitar and looks at the stage and looks at David's, we're probably going a bit off topic here, but when you look at David's effects rack, there are so many pedals on it. But he doesn't have them all on at the same time. He'll have sometimes he might only have one on, It's just he likes to replicate the sound he gets on the records. And essentially, if you take a fuzz pedal, well, fuzz pedals are great because you could just ride the volume on your guitar and you could have a clean sound, a medium overdrive sound, and a lot of distortion.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And all that David does when he plays now is he has one pedal that has a clean sound or a little bit, tiny bit of hair of overdrive, one that has medium overdrive, one that has distortion. And then he has so it's like having a very precise controls on those different sounds. And in order to do so, he has 3 or 4 pedals, but that's it, and then he has, equalizers just to make it fine tune it to his ear, and compressors, and the compressors they can make the distortion pedals a little bit more distorted. And then he's just got a delay pedal, so it's not like he's got loads and loads of, he's got a lot of the same pedals doing different things.
Right.
It's
kind of like a chef's, what do they call it, a mise en place, where you have everything laid out for you so you can just get to work.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it's better to have 3 pedals all set in particular ways rather than sit there and twiddling knobs.
Yeah, exactly. Last time we spoke, did I mention about David and the Alan Psychedelic Breakfast thing, and we didn't talk about it?
No, I missed to ask you at that time. It's true, and I almost missed to ask you again.
So what happened was we were looking for things to play, and I came across. We obviously haven't done it, and I don't think we're going to because it's quite long. But I found this bootleg from Sheffield of Alan Psychedelic Breakfast, and when I heard it quite near the start, David comes in on guitar, and then he has an echo of his guitar, and it comes in. It's like 2 seconds after the first thing he's played, and I just thought that's crazy. How the hell did he do that back then? Because nowadays you could do it. You've got you could probably get him
a 2-day delay.
For ages. And I asked him, and he wasn't too sure. He asked me to send him a copy of the bootleg, so I sent it to him, and he had listened to it, and he said he worked out it must have been an Echoplex, which is an echo machine from he had Bensons, and then they had Echoplexes, and there was also the Copycat as well. There were loads of other things as well. But he didn't remember ever having an Echoplex, but he listened to it and said that's what it must be. So I just thought I'd sort of add that in as a bit of
for the anorex.
Fun fact. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He said he thought it sounded like an experiment that didn't really work very well or something like that. So I can't remember the exact wording, but yeah.
Yeah, they did only 2 times. Correct, Phil?
Something like that. I mean, we only have 1 on tape, but there are 2 or maybe 3 times. Right. Yeah, and they
only played. They only played that song twice.
Yeah.
Wow! I didn't know that.
I was a special treat for I mean, they seem to really, when they finished their touring in the UK and England, they often seem to give people special treats. And so in this thing, they had like, I don't remember whether it was cereal boxes or they had some kind of breakfast paraphernalia on stage, and they were serving tea and frying an egg. And so
I just didn't realise that they only played it twice. I thought it was part of the set for the tour. I didn't realise.
Very briefly, yeah. No,
he actually said it sounds like a ropey experiment that maybe we didn't repeat too often. Well, he was right. So,
yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Another thing I think about a lot when I think about the Syd Barrett years and how things changed later, and this is something that I think anybody can fire up a bootleg and listen to. Pink Floyd used to be faster. I mean, in other words, in 1967, they were a lot faster than they were in 1970. And I think it's interesting to think about why that was. And I think part of it just had to do with the fact that Syd Barrett was a different kind of musician with a different set of priorities.
Yeah, you're right. The gig we were talking about before, the bootleg of them in Sweden, is so fast. It's like they've got to get out to a dinner reservation or something. They're like playing really fast. And I remember when we played Set the Controls, I start off obviously you got Nick with the gong, but I start off the tempo of the song. And one night we played it, I did it really slow. And as we came off, Guy said to me, "That was so slow, David would have liked it." But you're absolutely right. They were they fast in Ummagumma time though? They weren't.
They were faster than they became.
Well, they were faster. Right.
Yeah, but they stopped being fast in the 70s, and I think there's a quite obvious explanation for that. They had not too much material, so they had to prolong the songs. They had to improvise, and they had to play slow.
Maybe.
I mean, talking about the era of Atom Heart Mother now, the very early 70s, I think they missed Sid a lot. They had really, I put it in the sheet, but I'm not too sure about if you can call it like that, but there were some sort of a creative low at that point, I would say. We talked with Ron Geeson about it, how much they struggled, at least for the studio version. I would say the band-only live versions were great, but yeah, they had not too much material. So, I mean, if you play fast, it's 50 minutes. If you play slow, it's 25.
Yeah.
So, did you propose Atom Heart Mother to Nick when you had the first test gigs done in the Pocket?
I've got a feeling it might have been Gary who said, "Why don't we attempt it?" I think. I can't remember. But I know what we did, which is we all went round to Nick's house and put it on and listened to it. And we all made, we were making notes probably on our phones, but mostly, or some bit would come up and we go, "We can't do that bit. That won't work for us," or "This bit might work." And I remember, so I think Atom Heart Mother version we do is 7 minutes. It's nothing. It's really short. But we just picked the bits that we thought we would play best. I mean, I would really like to have done Funky Dung more like the record, where it's just guitar, bass, and drums really, and the Hammond hardly doing anything, and then build it up. But that never happened. It would have been nice to do something like that. But I guess it's just another guitar solo that the audience have to sit through, which is probably why we didn't do that. But was there anything else that happened? I think we did that.
So did you listen to the studio version, to the original?
We listened to the studio version.
Yeah.
And so Dom then made a note of what we all said we'd like to do. And then he went to the band. I think it was a BBC session. I think it was a BBC session. And he then edited that down, because obviously that would sound more like us because it hasn't got the orchestra on it. So he then edited it down and we listened to that. And then and Gary and I realised that there was an overdub slide solo, so we could actually do that together. And I just remember when we first played it in Stockholm, Guy saying, as we were about, no, he didn't say this on stage, he said it after, but as we were about to play it, he was thinking, what the hell are we doing? We're trying to play Atom Heart Mother, and it's just the first gig we've done, proper gig after those small ones, but we kind of put our own stamp on it. I don't do an awful lot in it. It's really the other guys do. Gary's got that. He's always practicing that sound check to make sure his fingers are moving in the right way on the acoustic. It's probably the most prog we get, with the guitar on the stand, and then and all the choir sounds on the keyboards, and great track.
A couple interesting bits of trivia. You probably know these, but did you know that the song originally had a 2 or 3 minute Nick Mason drum solo in it?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, when they first brought it out live for about the first few months, Nick got a huge drum feature as part of it. It went on for several minutes. Right. And it was after the Funky Dunk section. It was after the reprise of the main theme. And so he would just take a long drum solo. I understand why they cut it, because, first of all, it must have been a little bit exhausting for him. And second of all, it would push the song in just the quartet without even the orchestra to being well over 20 minutes, I think.
Right.
So that's one thing. Another thing is Ron Geeson. Have you ever met Ron, by the way?
No, I've not.
Oh, no. He's so charming. He was such when we talked to him, it was such a pleasure. But he has a book called The Flaming Cow, and he writes how he was a little bit heartbroken because everything he had in mind for the middle section of the tune, the Funky Dunk part, got moved by one beat. So every single thing in the choir, every single thing.
That's
right.
Yeah.
I think he finally redid it himself. Yeah. I don't remember whether that was the gig that Gilmore guested on, but it finally got redone the way he had heard it originally.
Right. See, that's a good example, actually, because that gig he did at the Cadogan Hall, I actually went to that to listen to how he would play it now, to get the sound for what I do with it now. So I wasn't, but then last year I went back to the album version and thought, I'll play it like that. I always have a lot of fun mixing and matching around.
Leaping ahead a little bit to Meddle here, but since we already talked about One of These Days a little bit, a while ago I had some fun presenting at a conference about what women have contributed to Pink Floyd's music, which I think is actually more than is usually recognized. Claire Torrey is the obvious one, and obviously Polly. But also there are contributions by other folks along the way, one of whom is Delia Derbyshire, who you probably know is the composer or co-composer of the Doctor Who theme. So, yeah. And it's been fascinating. One of the things as I work up some of my research into a book form, one of the things that's been fascinating is to see how often David Gilmour quotes that theme. He quotes it in Cymbeline, he quotes it in One of These Days, and then he quotes it in early versions of Raving and Drooling, the early version of Sheep. And then, and he was still quoting.
Oh yeah, don't,
exactly.
Yeah, of course. I actually hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, of course. Right.
There's this interview that David did where he said in 1974 when they were still working the new songs out, he said, well, Raving and Drooling I feel is a little bit derivative, and we were talking about this on the last episode. I made me say, derivative of what? And then it hit me like a thunderbolt. One of These Days. It's basically a sequel to One of These Days of sorts. But yeah, he was even quoting Delia Derbyshire's, the distinctive Doctor Who tune, even in 2016. So he clearly is attached to it, when he plays One of These Days. Do you ever? I don't remember. Has that ever come up in your performances of the song?
We play. Dom plays it on the keyboard.
He does play it on the keyboard. Okay.
He does the melody. And then, because when he finishes the melody, I then have to go chicka 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 with the slide on the guitar. And if I don't do it at that time, Guy gets very annoyed. He does do it. I think. Is it David or Tim Rennick who play it on the later on? Maybe it is David. I think Guy wanted me to do it, and I was like, I'm not playing that on the slide. I only just started learning how to play it. You know what I mean? So that's why Dom does it. But yeah, we do it. Yeah.
Another thing I think about a lot in my work is how Pink Floyd's song structures changed over time. Right. I think a lot of the early songs, it strikes me that they started with some kind of basic idea, and then they did a lot of improvising on stage until they found things that they liked, and then they kept them. But there's some real outliers too. And one that comes to mind because it's in the band's repertoire is the Nile song, which I think because you've played it, you've had to think about some funny things about its structure that maybe a lot of people don't pick up with a listener, which is basically, it's a barber pole that goes on forever, right?
Yeah.
Every chorus modulates up a key and up a key and up a key.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's something I want to mention before I forget, and I'm sure this is the kind of thing that probably, I'm guessing this must have come up, which I'm sure you know that there were a few songs early on where Nick sang lead vocals.
Yeah.
Corporal Clegg being one of them, and Scream Thy Last Scream. I can't imagine that somebody didn't float the idea of him reprising his role as a lead vocalist, and I can't imagine that if it did, it wasn't shot down in short order. Or was it?
No, we've really tried to get him to do Scream Thy Last Scream, but he just doesn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe he's just doesn't want to drum and sing at the same time. I imagine when they recorded it, he probably overdubbed the vocals, I'm sure. Maybe he just doesn't want to do that. But I still think that, we could do it without him singing it, just someone else singing it. But no, it just hasn't. It hasn't happened.
And circling way back, do you know that David says, as he said at one point, that he actually played Scream Thy Last Scream with the band, which is wild to think of. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was astonished. Of all the songs to play live with the band, I would have never guessed that he would have played.
Hey, maybe that's who we should play it with.
There we go.
When we play next.
If it's free,
So. Cool. The thing with our band is, and I probably said this on the last one, I can't remember, but we tend to only play songs that everyone likes. So if I say, I want to do Matilda Mother, and someone else just doesn't get it, we just don't do it. So in a way it's great, because it means we're always looking forward to the next song and we're enjoying playing the song we're playing presently. But it also means that there are going to be a lot of songs that we just don't try or haven't tried. And now that we're doing Echoes, we kind of always have to play Echoes. And if you always have to play Echoes, that's basically 25 minutes of other songs you're never going to be able to play.
Right.
So if you're playing for an hour and 52 hours, I think we've got to a point now where, like all the tribute bands and, Roger and David, although David less so on his last tour because he wasn't playing as much of the older stuff as he did on the tour before, but where they all have to play the songs you expect them to play, we kind of now have to play all the old songs that people expect to us to play. So if we don't play Arnold Lane, people will be like, well, why did they do that? Or if we don't play, I could actually Set the Controls is fun to play, but I'd quite happily retire it for something else. But it is a really big number from that era, and it's also Nick's favourite song of that era to play. But there's so that's already 20, that's already like 35, 40, that's already you're already heading into like 45 minutes of songs there, or nearly, that we have to play. It's a difficult one, but I don't know. I think we'll. I'd like to think that when we go out again, we'll try something different, even if it's just one song different. I don't know. We'll see. There
is a song that is maybe the most mysterious Pink Floyd song of all. You probably know about it. 1 in a Million. Do you know about this one?
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously I know that it might be complicated to do a song that's 100% kind of a Roger thing versus something maybe more collective.
I just think, I don't know if, I've never broached that with everyone. Does a whole version exist with all the lyrics?
Well, we have a complete version. One might need to ask Roger to make the lyrics out, because he can get about half of them, but half of them are very murky.
Right.
And you can hear him saying, would you like to be 1 in a million? Would you like to be 1 in 5? But I think people are close to getting maybe 75% of it, but of course, 75% isn't really quite enough. So, I think that...
But I think it's kind of verging into sort of like niche territory. It really is like,
for sure.
like let's do a song that no one knows. Even the fucking singer doesn't know it.
Right, exactly.
Can you decipher it, Roger? I don't know if we do that.
You could milk it in a pretty mercenary way and say, unreleased Pink Floyd song, Pink Floyd song rather. Not on any album.
Yeah. Or like do Into the Beechwoods and make up the lyrics.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. You know, I think one of the questions that Nils was going to ask was about why we didn't do Fat Old Son. You know, and because I was just thinking about songs, the other songs we could play, but we didn't choose that primarily because David has just started doing it again in 2006, and then did it again in 2016, and it's well documented. And he also did it on that.
Meltdown?
Acoustic, meltdown thing. So there's already like 3 well documented, videos, whatever, CDs, whatever, of him doing it now. So that it kind of felt silly for us to do it as well.
And the Embryo?
The Embryo, I think Dom and myself were quite up for doing it. Nick's easy, but I don't think Guy and Gary were really into doing the Embryo.
Oh, okay.
I think the thought, if they probably don't want to stand there and sing, all is, that's probably what it is. And I don't blame them if that is what it is, but I'm guessing, knowing them, that's probably why. There's a funny thing within our band where it's the way it is because of it's the 5 of us, and Gary and Guy are not huge on let's see where this goes. They kind of want to keep it a little bit more under control, I suppose. So like when we do set the controls and Gary does that massive echo improvisation, of course that's not the same every night. It can't be. It literally can't be. But he obviously knows where he wants to go with it, so he stays within that framework. In the same way that, and this is another question you had, I suppose, with Saucerful of Secrets, how they used to do it from that. They used to have like it wasn't musical notes, was it? He used
charts
to have
and diagrams and
architectural
diagrams.
So Gary's obviously got his own version of that in his improvisation part, but when we do like the seagull sequence again, that's not in Echoes. That's not the same every night. It can't be. The Echoes set up in a certain way, and it would be weird trying to replicate it the same way every night. You just try and tell a different story. But I think like where there's something like Childhood's End, where the Floyd used to start playing that Cream song, We're Going Wrong, was it, I think?
Yeah. Like
Nick quite wanted to do that. We were up for it, but Guy and Gary again were like, no, because I think they just thought, why are we starting to play a Cream song? I think there are moments where I would like to go off a bit more, but I suppose that the danger is that you might end up. It's difficult on stage when you're improvising because you'll probably know this. Like when you're improvising, what you think has been going on for about a minute is really about 15 seconds. And so you're and when I say improvising, I mean something completely different. You go onto that into an E chord, and then Dom can play a few notes here, and I play something, and Gary flashes. And so, like when we were doing Interstellar Overdrive, that always had a structure to it, but it did have this little bit in the middle where I could play little bits and pieces and just go do a freak out, and then another night I wouldn't do that. And when I listen back to it, and I'm thinking, I better stop now because I'll completely lose the audience. I listen back to it, and it was like 3 bars, and you think it's just you kind of get worried about, and it's a certain kind of improvisation that you get worried about how people are going to take it. If you're just doing, a David playing Comfortably Numb and he's improvising that every night, that's totally different to suddenly playing atonal, being atonal. That's when you do think, am I going to lose the audience? So I get why we don't do that. I get it. But I do think sometimes it's a shame that we don't do more of it,
I think there's a great interview that David gave sometime in the 70s, I think it was, where he talked about the experience of being on stage, doing freely improvised music with the Floyd, and looking around and thinking like, what on earth am I doing? Like, what the hell is happening here? I mean, I think it's partly, you talked about a David Gilmour guitar solo in the kind of very lyrical blues influence way. I mean, listening to one of those is kind of like listening to a great public speaker or a great preacher. Like you can feel all the big downbeats coming in a very straightforward way. Like there's an element, and I don't mean this word in any way pejoratively, of predictability to it, in the same way that every sentence we say, it's going to have a subject and a predicate and all these things. Whereas I think it probably feels like a long time when you're doing free improvisation, partly because you can't build those larger superstructures, and at least you're very in the moment, right?
That's an interesting point. Oh yeah, and I agree with you. Yeah. At the same time as well, like what you were just saying about David, which echoes what I was saying earlier on about how he doesn't play as many notes, so you can almost, I don't mean this like you know what he's going to play, it's boring, but I mean you can almost tell what's coming, and when it comes it sounds beautiful, and it's slow as well, so you can really it's funny. When you listen now, I mean this is off our topic, but when you listen to how slow he plays Comfortably Numb now compared to, but it doesn't sound, you're not listening, you're not in at the gig going, my God, this is really slow. It works like that. It works.
I mean, Comfortably Numb is a Baroque opera. It is absolutely, like, if you go and you listen to When I Am Laid on Earth by Purcell or something like that, it's essentially the same basic idea. The bass line slowly dropping over and over again, and somebody singing beautifully on top of it. So, it's a structure as old as time. I want to throw in a completely non-Pink Floyd topic for just a moment before we get back to it. It caught my eye that in the interview, I think it was, that I saw recently, you name-checked Joe Walsh specifically as a big influence, or at least as somebody who had some impact on you. And he's somebody who's been on my radar for a little while because I always kind of knew the more, for want of a better word, smartass side of him a lot when I was growing up. Yeah. And then I heard that Barnstorm record. Do you know that one pretty well?
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah, it's got that beautiful, beautiful ending of side one. Nils, I sent that to you the other day. 1 and 1 and Giant Behemoth, and it's so lyrical and so sort of sad and reflective. So he's a deep talent, I think. But do you want to talk a little bit about how he shaped you as a guitarist, or just what you feel you?
Well, I mean, actually, because we're talking about Pink Floyd, it's reminded me why I got into him, and it was, well, I got into everything because of my parents. So I've got completely my parents' taste in music, but with him, weirdly, not weirdly, I was a kid and I would have heard Life's Been Good. And I would have heard the talk box, the thing, which is also what David uses in Dogs, is it? Oh no, Pigs.
No, it's Dogs. Or I mean, there's the vocoder in Pigs where they say that.
No, I'm talking about the guitar.
Of course, yeah. They kind of do it thrice over on animals, don't they? They do the vocoder on sheep.
But so when I was a kid, on my 4th birthday, my parents took me to see my dad took me to see Peter Frampton on the Frampton Comes Alive tour, and of course he used a talk box. So I was really into that. And then a year later, David came out with the talk box on Pigs, and then Joe Walsh came out with it on Life's Been Good, which would have been a year after that, I think.
78.
So as a kid, I kept hearing that, and I think as a kid I just liked the sound of that, weird sound with the guitar, that's what got me into Joe Walsh. But, I think I bought a Joe Walsh anthology years later, and that had some of the Barnstorm stuff on it. And that's, I don't remember saying that in an interview though. I remember saying maybe I liked it, but I wasn't like madly into him, but he's certainly one of those guys that's, again, he doesn't play fast. Slow riffs, you remember them, Funk 49, that all that, that sexy stuff. No, he's great. He's great.
Do you know that Don Henley song, Dirty Laundry?
Yeah. That's got that weird kind of drops half a key down.
It's got that kind of almost Robert Fripp sounding guitar solo. That's Joe Walsh.
Yeah. It's mad. I've seen him do it live with him when they do the Eagles. When I've seen the Eagles,
One thing that the time period, getting back to Pink Floyd, the whole time period that we're discussing today, one thing that unifies it is it's the time in the band's history when Richard Wright had the most prominence, right? When his influence and his songs and his contributions. He once said in an interview that a lot of the music, most of the music in Echoes was his, which is sort of unusual for him to be. He's usually fairly diffident, but he came out right and said, no, that was mostly me. And, looking at the composition, I pretty much believe it, because it's got a very Richard Wright stamp on those chord progressions. But, his songs obviously often didn't get played live by the band. I mean, we had, obviously, when they were integrated into something larger, like Echoes Out of My Mother or Shine on You Crazy Diamond, they got played, or Great Gig in the Sky. But so I wonder, has that ever been consciously, playing songs like Burning Bridges, Remember a Day, things like those, has it ever been consciously on your mind that, like, this is the chance for that side of Richard's work to get an airing, I suppose?
I think when we pick the songs, absolutely, yeah. I mean, when we're playing them live, I'm not really thinking that, but absolutely when we put them into the set. In fact, when we put Burning Bridges in, Gary and I wanted to merge it with Mudmen and make one song out of it, but we never got around to it. I think we just there's a lot of things, I've been saying that a lot tonight, we never got around to that, but I still would like to do that. I love the idea we had for that, but a lot of people ask us to do Summer 68 as well, but I think there's a couple of people who are in the band who aren't that keen on it, so we haven't tried it.
It would be tricky. I mean, I
think it would be tricky.
There's so many changes up and downs, and there's the brass, and other things.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, that might be like Dom coming into his own somewhere, but we'll see. I mean, Dom and I have spoken about when Saucers finally stops flying, whenever that might be, of getting together with some other alumni and carrying on, not Saucerful of Secrets, but maybe doing some of these tunes that we've never done. And tunes from the later years as well, just doing a whole sort of like Pink Floyd Songbook. I mean, you could even do a track like Three Wishes from Amused to Death. We've chatted about it. I don't know if it will ever happen, but it would be nice to be able to play some of these things live. But I just don't know whether it's got that. Without Nick, I don't know if we going to draw that many people in to watch us playing, Sisyphus. You know what I'm saying.
I love it. I'd be there every day of the week and twice on Sundays. But speaking of playing with Nick, I've talked to a couple of different people who've played with him, and I think one of the things that often gets bandied about in the music press is the idea that he plays behind the beat, which half of me knows exactly what that means, and the other half has no idea what that means, if you understand what I'm saying. It's like, I think what they mean is that instead of a push feeling where it feels like everything feels like it's always on the verge of rushing, it has more of a more relaxed feeling where it feels like, so
absolutely.
But I wonder, would you mind speaking a little bit? Just, I realize that, Nick is a very melodic player, and I think probably you experience a lot of what he contributes in a more melodic way versus a timekeeper. But
absolutely,
talking a little bit about just the push and pull of playing with him and maybe how it feels different from other drummers with whom you've played.
It's totally different to other drummers, and it is like, and you actually just took the words out of my mouth, really, that it is melodic. It's not like playing with, it sounds crazy, but it's not like playing with a drummer. Mm-hmm. It's like playing with another melodic instrument, and there are sometimes we'll play Fearless, where it will just go like, and it carries on. You're going, whoa, but it works completely. But it's the longest fill I've ever played with anyone. But it absolutely fits, because that's what makes it sound like Pink Floyd. Just those little things. And also, the main thing with Nick is his ride cymbal. How he rides the ride cymbal. I know it's him as soon as I hear the ride cymbal. Even on one of their albums, I can tell, that's Nick Mason. It's just the way he, eases into it. And I guess that is what, as I just said, that's what makes it sound like Pink Floyd. If it was anyone else, it wouldn't sound like that. I think that the early years are where he's able to be more experimental. These years that we play. And that's why I think I wasn't thinking this when I had the idea, but it's why it works so well, because those are the songs that he really, I wouldn't say shines on, because he's still a drummer. It's not his job to shine on it, but it's before that time where David has really worked out what David Gilmour does on guitar, and Nick just really has to keep the beat while these amazing solos come out. And while David was still working out what that was, Nick was a lot more, One of These Days in Pompeii, for instance. You know, it's funny how it works out that the only footage they have is of Nick, because that proves what I'm saying exactly, basically.
Right. Yeah, that movie at times feels like almost like a love letter to Nick. I mean, and not it just really, it's fascinating both when you listen to bootlegs, but especially when you read press reports from 68, 69 and early 1970s. Time and time again, some people loved the band, some people hated the band, but they all almost always say, what a great drummer. It's fascinating, actually. It really feels as though, I wonder whether he was maybe conscious of his need to kind of give everything to keep them alive and afloat and dynamic live when presumably David was still finding his footing. They were all recovering from what happened with Sid. It's amazing how many people single him out as the best part of Pink Floyd, which is, I think, and which, I mean, and again, that's without making any invidious comparisons, to be clear, but it's just fascinating that the reviewers laser-like focus on his energy and the fact that he's not like other drummers.
Yeah, no, I think when I watched Pompeii the other week, it struck me that they were very tight within their improvisation then, and then when they did Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, they suddenly had to be tight differently, and it's weird because. I suppose, when was Pompeii? 70? Was it filmed in 71?
October 1971, yeah, for the most part.
So it's filmed in 71, and they've become like the best version of Pink Floyd of that era, of those 4 or 5 years, or whatever you want to. And then once they've done Dark Side, and then they've got the tapes, and they've got to play with the tapes, and they've got Wish You Were Here. Some people are going to hate this, but they sound really ropey in places on some of those bootlegs from the mid-70s.
Oh, yes. We just had a whole episode about that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and the band admitted it to themselves. There's this great book, I don't know if you've seen it, In the Pink by Nick Sedgwick, where it's got all these...
I know of it.
It basically transcribes everything they were saying to each other, and they were so self-aware of how much they needed to work on getting it together to be at the level they wanted to be. They basically said, hey, we were sounding good in 73, and then in 74 they felt like everything had kind of gone whoop. You can hear them clawing their way back.
Yeah, and it's sort of like I wished that they had carried on with that improvisation, that the way they were improvising back then into the mid-70s. And then after that, obviously The Wall, there's no room for it, obviously, for obvious reasons. And then when Rogers left, and then they carry on. The only sort of improvisation you've really got that's obvious, I mean, obviously, there are going to be different fills every night, and Rick and John Caron are going to play slightly different things, but that's not the improvisation of 1971. That's just a band playing together. The only real improvisation is David's solos, and it's kind of like it's almost like it's a rehearsed improvisation, I suppose, which we do as well. It's still better than being like a pit orchestra on Broadway or something. We have to play it exactly the same every night. But it's a shame that they didn't utilize how good they'd become later on within their performances. But maybe I'm repeating what you said in your last podcast.
Not really. Yeah, I think, and it's really interesting too. When something goes wrong, this is something that came up before too, it really seems to liberate them. Like if you listen to some of those old bootlegs, as soon as there's some glitch that takes away the possibility of being perfect, I don't know whether part of their brain maybe said, oh, okay, we can't offer them perfection tonight. We've got to up our game in the improvisation domain. But some of the best gigs are the ones where, there was something funny happened, and then all of a sudden everybody sounds like they're on fire and giving their absolute all. But they were very forthright within their circle, into their, I guess you could call them biographer or a journalist at the time, about how they did not feel right until well into very close to the end of 1974 did they finally click in. So, and I suppose that's a lesson all of us musicians too, is that, I mean, long ago, I actually covered Dark Side of the Moon with a band at my college. And we rehearsed it like hell. And then when the event came, there were problems with the sound, and several things went wrong. It still hung together, but it was not the perfect thing we wanted it to be. And so afterwards, the crowd wanted more, and so we jammed on Breathe for about 25-30 minutes. And afterwards, it was shocking how many people came up to us and said that was their favorite part of the concert. So I suppose it's a lesson to all of us, right? I think people go to a show and they want to experience something singular, right? Something that feels like it's crafted especially for that particular moment in time.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's all about playing live, isn't it? I mean, that's what, and also when mistakes happen, that's what makes that night special. You know, that's what was different that night. You know, I don't mean like when something awful happens, like the tapes don't work, but I mean, if someone plays a wrong note or something and they have to come back from that, and things like that. Yeah, that's what makes a night different.
I also went to the cinema for watching Pompeii again, and I think I watched it for like 10th time or whatever, but just being at the cinema and watching the original Pompeii and then the studio thingies in between from the Abbey Road, I finally realized, and I never realized before, that as you said, Lee, the Pompeii is some sort of a farewell present of the old Floyd. And it was so strange when it was in cinema that you were just watching a Saucerful of Secrets, which is really old Pink Floyd and it's at its best. And then half a minute later, you see Wright playing on the piano with a saxophone.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, this is Pink Floyd at almost the same time. You have one of these days, and then you have a saxophone there, which changed everything for them and the way they played at the Abbey Road. And it is the transition. The Pompeii movie, as its original Maiden cut, is, a sneak peek of the new Pink Floyd and a goodbye to the old Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And I never realized that before.
Yeah, I know. I'd not thought of that. I mean, Nick said the other week that it had 3 eras, because it had Careful with That Axe era. It then had Echoes, which hadn't come out yet. Meddle hadn't come out. Had it come out? No, it hadn't come out. Had it?
Not at the time of filming. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it had a preview of what was to come. So it's interesting because he was saying that in the Q&A when he did the first screening of Pompeii 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was asked about it, and I'd never thought of that either. Usually a band has when they do something like that, it's for one project. But this was all like, it was the old, the present, and then what's coming. Yeah.
So we went totally off the rails, and I honestly love it. But anyway, before we wrap it all up, I would love to talk briefly with you again about the Obscured by Clouds album, because, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning already, but I think it's a very special album because it was 72. They were on the road where they road tested the new material for Dark Side of the Moon, and they had only a few weeks in France recording that album. And still, it's a wonderful album. It has so many great songs. It has even a very technical approach. The main track, Obscured by Clouds, or When You're In, I would say it's one of the very first, how do you call it, artificial drums.
Oh, yeah.
They have synth drums there.
Machine,
And I don't know, I guess the remix version from 2016. And you picked 3 songs as we talked about before. And because it is very untypical for Pink Floyd, because they created it in 4 weeks. I think they played 4 weeks for, let's say, 10 bars of Shiny when they created the Diamonds, and then they did it again. But this is the total opposite of the way they work normally.
Yeah, I've not really thought an awful lot about it. I think it certainly is. I think the lead track of Obscured by Clouds, it kind of really sounds like Pink Floyd. Like when we play it, I think the way it was positioned in the set, I can't remember now if it's where it is, but when we first started playing it, it was the first time in the show that it actually sounded like Pink Floyd, if you see what I mean. And it certainly sounds like what's to come. It's Obscured by Clouds is after Meddle and before Dark Side, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. But I don't know why people don't really, maybe because it's a soundtrack album, people don't really, it gets forgotten. People always tend to go Meddle, Dark Side, and they forget about Obscured.
I couldn't even find it when I was a kid. I remember hearing about this album. Granted, I lived in the middle of nowhere, but I was able to find every other album and had to search for years. This was a pre-internet. before I could find it. It's clear that it means something to Roger. The one bit of his past from that era that he references in his recent work is he recites the lyrics to Free For at the beginning.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, those words about, the memories of a man in his old age, or the deeds of a man in his prime, they clearly have resonance for him of some kind.
I mean, I'd said it before, I love Mudmen. I really like Mudmen.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I love, I've gone blank again, the one that David sings that he did on his tour with
What's the Deal?
What's the deal? Yeah, I love that track. I mean, again, we would have probably done that if he hadn't have done it on that tour. I love that song.
I mean, when I first saw you in Düsseldorf a few years back, I remember that I was very emotional during Obscured by Clouds and the start and everything. And it is, I would say, one of your main top hits, so to speak, on each show. And it is different every single time. To me personally, besides Atom Mother, maybe it's the most alive song you play. And I don't know why that is really. Yeah. But it is somehow very special, and
probably Dom.
But it is also special on the album.
It's probably Dom. Dom's keyboard intro is wicked on that.
Might be.
And Guy on the bass pedals as well. Yeah.
I mean, there's something when you're in that audience and you feel the impact. I did that more than any other song. You feel there's how much power Nick Mason has as a drummer, right? And there's something about that. Yeah. It's like there's something about the way that the sticks and the pedals hit the drums. It's not like anybody else, and you feel the weight of it in a very magical way.
Yeah. Well, I can't. The only time I can get near that is if I stick a desk tape on, but I have to have it on loud to hear. Which doesn't happen often.
So Lee, I think it's time to wrap it up. Or Phil, you got any more?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I could torment you with set list suggestions. Reaction in G and Seabirds.
There was one thing you were going to ask me, which was why did it take us so long to add echoes? Well, COVID. That's
sure.
why.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We were going to play it in 2020, but then we had to postpone the tour. So we wouldn't have been that long to wait for it. It would have been, we went out in 2018 in winter. We did summer, some dates in 2019, and we would have played it in like April 20. So that's why.
Yeah, and as you explained before, even though Echoes is wonderful and your rendition is really great, but something else has to go for it.
Yeah.
It's always a tough decision.
Yeah.
I mean, what to cut? Yeah, Lee, it was great having you again. It was really lovely.
Thanks. No, it's easy to talk for a long time. It's about all this stuff, and I know I digressed and free associated quite a lot.
I mean, if we manage to do 25 more episodes of the show, you'll be back.
Yeah.
Mark your calendar now, right?
Yeah. I hope that we certainly haven't we haven't said we're finished. I think there's every chance that we'll be, we want to play again, and I think we probably will next summer. We usually go out summertime, so hopefully it'll be next summer. Nick and I had a sort of a chat about maybe just us two getting together and having a bash about, like, just see if we come up with any ideas. I mean, not necessarily to make an album or anything, but just to have a bash about and see what we come up with. Maybe who knows? So we haven't spoken about finishing up or anything. It's a shame to not be playing this year, though. But
are we talking about the possibility of original material from like new?
Yeah, but I mean, as I said, I don't know what for. I mean, I literally said to him, I have absolutely no idea what it would be for, but it might be fun to see if we come up with anything, and then maybe if we do, maybe the others would be interested in doing something, or maybe we just do something in it, and just for our own enjoyment. Who knows? But we play together and we like playing together. So I think we'd rather do something like that than sit and try and play old Pink Floyd songs. We're just without the rest of the band. We could just see what we come up with. He's got a studio and there's not much going on in it. So we could maybe see if there's anything there. Who knows? But yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, I'm just saying, it's not like we haven't said we're finished or anything. So
we'll
see.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much once again, Lee.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
get to you.